Hello and welcome to another TLDR US video. As we get closer and closer to election day, people are paying more and more attention to polling. And as Biden has continued to hold a strong lead over Trump, Democrats are increasingly, if somewhat cautiously optimistic, while Republicans' feelings are trending in the opposite direction. However, the feelings of both sides here are tempered by a universal and apolitical concern, a worry over the reliability of polling. So today, let's take a look at that and ask, can we really trust the polls? Before we do though, and if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel. We regularly release videos on topics like these, and if you're subscribed and you've hit the bell icon, then you'll be notified every time we release. Also, you'll be helping us out a ton, so we really appreciate it. One of the first arguments people almost always bring up when questioning the reliability of the polls is the 2016 election. Infamously, most polls and pundits predicted that Hillary Clinton would beat Donald Trump on election day. But of course, that's not quite what happened. And as such, many people are hesitant to put their trust back in polling. However, as you might have guessed, the situation was a bit more complicated than is generally talked about. There's no shortage of explanations for why the 2016 went against the expectations of so many. And while this really isn't meant to be a deep dive into that mess, there are a few things about that November that are worth talking about. The main one being, the polls weren't actually off by that much. Some certainly were, but as a whole, most polls, especially on a national level, were fairly close to the actual result. State polls were off by a slightly wider margin, but still not such a huge one that we should never trust them again. 2016 was, after all, a very close election. 2016 was also unique for another set of reasons: the candidates. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton were, respectively, the most disliked and second most disliked major party candidates in American history. Or at least in American history we have polling information for. Both candidates were widely perceived to be dishonest, and if you live in the US, chances are you know someone who says something along the lines of, "Wow, I really wish there was actually a good option instead of these two." Perhaps you even said it yourself. This, of course, is not us endorsing that view, but it's undeniable that it was a widespread thought at the time. To this day, Clinton is held in low regard, with YouGov finding her current popularity to be 10 points in the negative. And that's after she's been out of the spotlight for 4 years. The dynamic today, however, is very different. While Donald Trump continues to be historically unpopular, Joe Biden is actually pretty well liked, with a net approval rating on YouGov coming out at +2. Trump, meanwhile, has a solid -13. All this is to say that the polling for 2020 should be evaluated through a very different lens than that of 2016. The Biden-Trump dynamic is very different from the Trump-Clinton dynamic, and it's hard to separate this from the current polling numbers. But this still doesn't get us to a clear answer on the question of polling reliability. So, with all of this in mind, let's dive into some of the more common arguments against the polls. First, and perhaps most prominent, is the assertion that polls tend to oversample Democrat or Democrat-leaning voters. In particular, this is an argument that the president and some of his advisors have taken to using as a defense for their current numbers. And, well, it's sort of true. Emphasis on sort of, though. Because, as with everything to do with polls, in order for it to be truly accurate, this statement would have to be followed with a mile of asterisks. Here, the big thing to note is that while poll respondents in general are slightly more likely to be Democrat than Republican, that gap is both small and, crucially, consistent. In other words, the Democrat-Republican polling gap today is pretty much the same one we saw earlier this year, when Biden was polling lower than he is now. For that matter, it was even pretty much the same back in 2016, when Hillary Clinton was polling significantly lower than Biden is today. Basically, yes, Democrats are somewhat oversampled, but not by much, and not in a way that suggests that Biden is actually doing much worse than the polls are telling us. In a similar vein to this is the idea that some Trump supporters are hesitant to voice that support to pollsters. Essentially, the line of thought goes that since many of Trump's views are unpopular, people being asked about their thoughts on said unpopular views, as well as the person voicing them, are likely to voice less support for them than they actually have, as sort of a subconscious way to avoid the potential judgment of others. However, there's little evidence to support this, and in fact, quite a bit of evidence goes against it. For one thing, a 2016 post-election analysis by Columbia University found that states where Trump outperformed polling estimations by the most were states like North Dakota, West Virginia, and Oklahoma, none of which are exactly states in which someone might expect to be ostracized for voting Republican. There's also the point that were the shy Trump voter hypothesis correct, one could expect to see a meaningful difference between responses to an online poll and responses to a phone poll. This is because since phone polls require personal interaction, people will presumably be more afraid of being judged, and thus more likely to lie, than on an anonymous virtual poll. However, a study by Politico and the Morning Consult found there to be little to no statistically meaningful difference between the two methods. Therefore, it's pretty safe to assume that there's no hidden wave of shy Trump supporters waiting to swing him in the election. Finally, we have to address the issue of state polling versus national polling. In 2016, most of the focus was directed towards the national average, and when all was said and done, the average was only off by about 2 points. On top of that, most polls were correct. Hillary Clinton did win the national vote. It was the swing states, specifically Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, that Trump significantly outperformed what the polls were predicting. And it was through those polls that he ended up winning the Electoral College. And even in most of these swing states, the polling wasn't too far off. Most mistakes were well within the average poll's margin of error. But all of that aside, even if we're going off the rails and assuming that the 2016 polls were an absolute abomination to mathematics and political science, it would mean that we should totally disregard this year's polls. And that's because there's few things that will make an industry change faster than an entire nation being loudly and viscerally angry at its performance. And that is exactly the response the American polling world got after Trump's win. This year, in an attempt to salvage their reputation, most pollsters have a different set of regulations and expectations than they did in 2016, meaning we're much less likely to see well-regarded organisations make huge mistakes again this year. All of that said, one thing warrants mentioning here. There's still a great deal of time between now and Election Day. If 2020 has taught us anything, it should be that literally anything can happen. And if it's bad, it probably will. Polling is not meant to be a predictive model for Election Day. It's supposed to give us an idea of how the electorate is feeling at any given moment. The polls can and do, and will continue to fluctuate based on the news cycle and various gaffes, scandals and crises of the current moment. And this, it should be noted, also applies to Election Day. Elections are not above being influenced by the short-term news cycle. And in fact, many have argued this is exactly what cost Clinton her assumed victory 4 years ago, though obviously there's no way to know for sure. However, it is indisputable that one of the most decisive factors in a Trump victory was the fact that he won voters who decided on a candidate at the last minute by a significant margin. Whether this was because of the reopening of Clinton's email case, Trump's outsider status, or just a random coincidence of impulsive feelings is impossible to know. But whatever the reason, it provides a lesson for us today. Things change, and they often do so very quickly. Perhaps the coronavirus vaccine will emerge right before the election and give people more faith in Trump's government. Perhaps Biden will make some unforgivable mistake in the eyes of Rust Belt voters. Maybe some meteor will wipe us all out next week and none of this will matter. Who knows? The point is, don't be surprised if Biden or Trump's fortunes change in the coming weeks. But to answer the question posed at the beginning of this video, yes, you can trust the polls. You may want to pay more attention to the swing state polls than the national polls, and you probably shouldn't be proclaiming a winner just yet. But in general, the polls are fairly safe to trust. And despite what may be floating around about 2016, they have a pretty decent historical track record. Just don't be too surprised if things change. What do you think though? Do you trust polling data? And do you feel that it's too early to start predicting a Biden victory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, you can also get involved in the conversation over on our Discord server. There's a link to that in the description. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be notified every time we release a new video. You can also find us across all social networks simply by searching for TLDR News. Special thanks to our Patreon backers for their support, which makes videos like this one possible. And if you want to see your name listed at the end of the videos just like these people, then be sure to back us on Patreon. There's a link to that in the description.